Have you ever sat alone with a cup of tea, looked out the window and wondered, how did I get here? I'm not talking about geography. I mean deep down. How did your life unfold the way it did? And why does it still tug at you sometimes, even after all these years? If you're over 60 and you've been through a long marriage, or maybe you're still in one, those quiet questions can feel louder with age. Now, I'm not a woman, and I'll never pretend to understand every experience from a woman's shoes. But I've lived a long life, and I've sat across many kitchen tables with women who were brave enough to open up. Friends, neighbors, cousins, my own sister. Some still wear their wedding rings. Some tossed theirs in a drawer decades ago. And in those talks, those honest late afternoon talks that only happen after 60, I started to hear the same 5 regrets over and over. Let me tell you, these aren't about blaming anyone. They're about reflection. They're about waking up one day and realizing parts of yourself went quiet for too long. But here's the good news. Regret doesn't mean it's too late. Regret is a sign your heart still wants something more. And as long as your heart is still beating, you've got time. So, let's talk about that first regret. It shows up in the smallest ways. You reach for a dress you loved 20 years ago, but it no longer feels like you. You pass by the piano you used to play, untouched. You catch yourself saying, I used to love doing that. And then you go quiet. The regret? Losing your sense of self. It happens slowly. No one wakes up one morning and decides to give up who they are. It's a series of tiny trades. You choose his favorite meal instead of yours. You follow his career from one town to the next. You keep the peace by saying less, asking less, needing less. And before long, the woman you once were becomes someone you only remember in old photographs. I knew a woman named Linda. Sharp as a tack, warm-hearted, taught Sunday school for years. She once dreamed of being a nurse, but life pulled her in other directions. Married young, raised 3 kids, and by the time she was in her 50s, she couldn't remember the last time she did something just for herself. When I asked her what she wanted to do now that the house was quiet, she looked at me and said, I don't know who I am anymore. That sentence stuck with me. Because it's not just about career or hobbies. It's about identity. It's about waking up and feeling connected to the woman in the mirror. Not as someone's wife or mother, but as you. And if that woman has gone missing, I want you to know. You can find her again. Start small. You don't need to book a cruise to Italy or enroll in a course tomorrow. Start by asking yourself, what did I enjoy before life got busy? What books moved you? What music made you dance in the kitchen? What opinions did you hold strong before you were told to calm down or let it go? Take one of those things back, even if it's just for an hour. Revisit your old journal. Try painting again. Say what you think at the dinner table, even if it ruffles a few feathers. This isn't about rebellion. It's about resurrection. You're not trying to become someone new. You're trying to remember who you already are. The second regret I hear from women, especially after decades of marriage, is about silence, and not the peaceful kind. The silence that fills a home where 2 people stopped talking like partners long ago, where conversations became logistics, not connection, where emotions were swallowed instead of shared. Many women stayed quiet for good reasons. At least that's what they believed at the time. Maybe he wasn't someone who listened well. Maybe speaking up caused arguments. Maybe the kids were young and there just wasn't room for another emotional storm. So they held it all in. The disappointments, the loneliness, the dreams that were slowly shelved and forgotten. But over time, silence builds walls. Not just between 2 people, but inside your own chest. You stop trusting your voice. You stop trusting that your needs matter. And by the time you reach 60, you might look back and think, why didn't I speak up for myself more? Let me tell you, your voice is still there, and it's wiser now. It's been tempered by years, by heartbreak, by love, by loss. That voice may not shout, but it doesn't need to. It only needs to speak clearly, honestly. Whether you're still married or not, whether he's still listening or long gone, your truth is still worth saying. Speak to yourself first. Say out loud the things you've been afraid to admit. I was lonely. I didn't feel seen. I needed more. Just naming those feelings doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. And if you're still in a relationship but feel like you've been living beside someone instead of with them, start small. One honest sentence at breakfast. One moment of eye contact that says, I'm still here, are you? It's never too late to try. And even if the other person isn't ready to meet you there, you'll know you honored yourself. That's not just healing, it's powerful. You see, marriage was never meant to erase you. A real partnership should give you room to grow, to speak, to change, and to still be loved in the middle of it all. If it didn't turn out that way, I'm sorry. But I believe this. Even now, even after 60, your truth can set you free. Now, I know these topics aren't always easy to face. Regret can feel heavy. But you and I, we've lived long enough to know that facing something is the first step to healing it. So if any of this sounds familiar, you're not alone. And you're not too late. We've got more to talk about. And you've got more life to live. Let's keep going. I remember sitting on my porch one evening with a neighbor named Joan. She was about 68 then, sipping a cup of black coffee even though the sun was starting to set. She was the kind of woman who smiled often, but it rarely reached her eyes. That day, she said something that stuck with me. She said, "You know what I regret the most? All the years I kept trying to fix something that didn't want to be fixed." Then she just stared off into the distance, not angry, just tired. That brings me to the third regret I hear from so many women. And maybe you felt this too. It's the regret of pouring years, sometimes decades, into a marriage that didn't nourish you, didn't grow with you, didn't even really see you anymore. You stayed, maybe for the kids, maybe for security, maybe because you hoped things would get better. But deep down, you knew the spark had gone out long ago. It's not always about dramatic fights or betrayal. Sometimes it's just the quiet erosion of connection. You stop laughing together, stop touching, stop dreaming. And yet, you stay. Because you're loyal. Because you're strong. Because you're afraid of what's on the other side. But when the years pass and the silence deepens, you start to wonder what you gave up to keep everything looking fine from the outside. I've heard women say, "I don't regret raising my children. I don't regret being there. But I do regret how long I ignored my own unhappiness." And that, my friend, is a hard truth. Because time is the one thing we never get back. You can rebuild a bank account. You can repair relationships. But you can't buy back your 40s or your 50s. Or all those mornings you woke up hoping he'd finally see you. So what now? Well, if you're still in that place, if you're still carrying the weight of that old silence, please hear this. You don't have to keep carrying it. You don't have to make yourself smaller, just to avoid rocking the boat. You can still choose joy. You can still choose yourself. Sometimes that means working to rebuild the relationship with fresh eyes and honest words. Sometimes it means stepping out of it with grace and dignity. And sometimes it just means waking up tomorrow and deciding, I will not spend another day waiting for someone else to change. That's not selfish. That's self-respect. And you've earned it. Now let's talk about the fourth regret, one that's even harder to admit. It's the regret that comes when you look around later in life and realize your relationship with your children isn't what you hoped it would be. I've seen the tears well up when women talk about this. They stayed in unhappy marriages thinking it was best for the kids. They kept the family together on paper, but emotionally, the cracks were everywhere. Children are perceptive. Even when they're young, they can feel tension. They can sense when love has gone quiet. And when that becomes the backdrop of their childhood, it leaves a mark. Not always in big, obvious ways. Sometimes it shows up in how they handle their own relationships. Sometimes it shows up in how distant they seem now. How quickly they get off the phone, how rarely they visit. I knew a woman named Carol who told me, "I gave everything to my family. I stayed. I sacrificed. I smiled when I wanted to cry. And now, my daughter barely talks to me." She wasn't bitter. She was just confused and hurt because she thought her silence had been an act of love. But the truth is, love needs truth to grow. And when we hide too much, even with good intentions, it builds walls instead of bridges. If your children have drifted, or if there's tension that no one talks about, I want to tell you something. It's not too late to reach for healing. No, you can't rewrite the past. But you can sit with them, heart open, and say, "I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. And if I got it wrong, I'm sorry. I want to understand you better now." You'd be surprised what a moment of vulnerability can do. It doesn't fix everything overnight, but it opens the door. And maybe that's all that's needed to begin again. Sometimes the hardest thing we can do is forgive ourselves for staying too long, for not knowing better, for doing what we thought was right at the time. But forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from shame so you can show up fully today. And let me say this, especially if you're feeling disconnected from your grown kids, you are still valuable to them. Even if they don't say it, even if they don't show it in the ways you hoped, your presence still matters. Your voice, your story, your love, it all still counts. Sometimes they just need you to reach out first. And maybe you're afraid to. That's okay. Do it anyway. Even a simple message that says, "I've been thinking about you," can open up a whole new chapter. I've seen it happen. Now, if these things are stirring something inside you, take a breath. Let that emotion come. It means your heart is still wide open, still willing to heal. That's a beautiful thing. Don't push it down. You know, when I talk to women over 60 about their marriages, I don't hear a lot of anger. I hear sorrow. I hear quiet longing. But I also hear strength. A deep, quiet strength that comes from surviving heartache, raising families, carrying burdens no one saw, and still standing tall. That's the kind of strength that can build something new, no matter your age. It can build reconnection, reinvention, even joy. You're not too old. You're not too late. And you're certainly not alone. There's one regret, the quietest of them all, that I hear more than any other. It doesn't come out right away in conversation. It hides behind polite smiles, behind stories about the grandkids, or memories of vacations long past. But if you sit with someone long enough, if you listen not just to the words, but to the silences in between, you'll start to hear it. It's the regret of losing yourself. Now, I've lived long enough to know this regret doesn't hit you like a thunderclap. It doesn't shout or throw things. No, it sneaks in gently. Over years, over decades. It whispers things like, "This isn't the time," or "It's not worth the argument." It tells you to be patient, to wait your turn. And before you know it, you've gone so long, Putting yourself last, that you've forgotten what it feels like to come first in your own life? I once knew a woman named Evelyn. She was a widow by the time we met, in her early 70s, always kind, always composed. But one day, we got to talking, really talking, and she said something that's never left me. She said, "I don't think he ever asked me what I wanted. And the worst part is, I stopped asking myself too." That right there, that's the heart of this last regret. When a woman gives so much of herself, to her marriage, to her children, to keeping the house running and the peace held, she can start to fade right out of her own story. And the hardest part? It usually happens in ways that look like love. You gave up your weekends because he needed rest. You stopped going back to school because someone had to keep things steady. You let go of the things that made you come alive. Singing, writing, gardening, laughing with friends. Because the schedule was full and time was tight. And after all those years, now that the house is quiet and the days stretch out longer, you look in the mirror and wonder, who am I now? Let me tell you something. The woman you used to be, she's still in there. She's not gone. She's just waiting. Waiting for you to invite her back. This isn't about undoing the past. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that never deserved to be buried. Your opinions, your curiosity, your sense of wonder, your desires, not just for others, but for yourself. What do you want now? Not what you're supposed to want. Not what you think is age appropriate. But what would make you feel alive again? Maybe it's painting again, even if your hands are a little shaky now. Maybe it's joining a book club, or traveling to a place you always dreamed of but never got around to. Maybe it's dancing in your kitchen with the music turned up, just because no one's watching. Or maybe, just maybe, it's finally speaking the truth you've been holding in for decades. And listen, I'm not here to say it's easy. Change never is. Especially when you've spent a lifetime caring for everyone else. But the time you have now, it's yours, fully, completely. No permission slip required. You don't need anyone's approval to live the way you want to live from this moment forward. Maybe you're still in a marriage that's quiet and tired. Maybe you're alone now and wondering if it's too late to rediscover yourself. Let me tell you, it's not. I've seen women in their 70s and 80s take up photography. I've seen them fall in love with someone else or just with their own life again. I've seen them grow bolder, not smaller, freer, not more fragile. But you have to decide you're worth rediscovering. Start by honoring your small choices. What do you want to eat today? What do you want to wear, not because it's practical, but because it makes you feel good? Who do you want to call? What memory do you want to write down before it fades? These may seem like small things, but they are sacred, because they say to the world and to yourself, I'm still here. I still matter. I still get to choose. And please don't let anyone tell you it's selfish. It's sacred. And the people who truly love you, they will be glad to see you light up again. Now, as we've talked through these regrets, losing your identity, staying too long in silence, sacrificing your happiness, feeling the distance from your children, and letting yourself disappear, I want to say one more thing. Regret is a powerful teacher, but it is not a life sentence. You are not broken. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are a woman who has lived and endured and given more than most will ever understand. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you extraordinary. And if your heart still beats with longing for joy, for connection, for purpose, then you're not done yet. Not by a long shot. So here's what I'll ask of you. Don't go back to sleep. Oh, don't shrink just because the world expects you to. Let yourself take up space. Let yourself be seen, Let yourself be heard. And if something I said today stirred something in you, even a little, leave a comment. Share your story. Someone out there needs to hear your voice. Maybe more than you know. And if you felt connected here, if this space feels safe to you, I'd be honored if you clicked that like button, subscribed to the channel, and stayed for more conversations like this. We're building a place where truth isn't something to fear. It's something we use to lift each other up. Here's to every woman who's walked through fire and still dares to hope. Here's to every story that isn't over yet. And here's to you, living your truest life, not someday, but now. I'll be right here with you.